Good afternoon, and welcome to this session of what we call Research in the Real World. I'm Mary Lou Leary, and I'm the Acting Assistant Attorney General at the Office of Justice Programs at the Department of Justice. Thanks to everybody for coming. And I want especially, before we begin, to thank the organizers of this event, Ron Wilson and Yolanda Curtis and others at the National Institute of Justice. And they worked very hard to bring us all together this afternoon. We have a really interesting program today, and we're going to use a little bit different format today. We're going to be talking about place-based policing. It's one of the hottest topics in police research today. And it also conforms with the Obama administration's focus on place-based programming. You may have heard that in August, the White House announced that it would be focusing on place-based policies in looking forward to the fiscal year of 2011. This focus on place-based policing will be an important part of that focus. You probably have heard the Attorney General, too, talk about the need to tie together research and practice. You know, so many of our approaches to crime in the past decade or so have not had a sound basis in empirical research. We're finding out more and more about what really does work in policing and in reducing and preventing crime. And frankly, we're also finding out a lot more about what does not work. Office of Justice Programs has really been working hard to improve our basis of knowledge in evidence-based practices, what does work, so that practitioners in the field can use their resources in the best way possible. The Attorney General is fond of saying we need to be smart on crime, not just tough on crime. So the research that Dr. David Weisberg has been doing is a big step in that direction. Today, rather than the usual lecture format, we are going to handle this as kind of an interview of Dr. Weisberg, and that'll give us all a chance to pick our guest's brain, so to speak, with some of the issues that are on our minds about hotspot policing. Our distinguished guest is the criminologist David Weisberg. He's the director of the Center for Evidence-Based Evidence-Based Crime Policy at George Mason University. He also has a joint appointment as the Walter Meyer Professor of Law and Criminal Justice and director of the Institute of Criminology at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's a member of the National Research Council's Committee on Law and Justice and founding editor of the Journal of Experimental Criminology. Recently, we are so proud to announce he received the Stockholm Prize in Criminology. That prize was awarded for his groundbreaking work in hotspots policing. And he's here today to talk about his work. We are delighted to have you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn.
Congratulations on your award. We're all very proud, especially the folks at the National Institute of Justice who've worked closely with Dr. Weisberg. So you've published a lot on this area of place-based policing. Sometimes we call it hotspots policing. And in your work, you argue that place is a new prominent concern for crime prevention experts. What do you mean by that?
Well, one way to think about this is in terms of a crime equation. Traditionally, both criminologists and crime prevention experts, police and others, they put people at the center of that equation. And the questions we ask are, why do people commit crime? What leads to certain people committing more serious crime? What leads to desistance or stopping the commission of crime? What can we do about those offenders to prevent them from committing crimes in the future or to rehabilitate them if they're in prisons or other institutions in the criminal justice system? So you might say, both for criminologists but also for the police, the question of whodunit has been at the center of the crime equation. There's also been another question that crime prevention practitioners and criminologists have asked. That's about large areas in crime. They've asked why certain regions or cities, more recently in the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, People have been asking why communities have crime, why some communities have more crime than others. This is a sort of, let's call it a macro place kind of idea. And it also is an important part of crime prevention, the way the police and others think about it. We organize our police by precincts, by police boroughs, even by police beats. And these are relatively large, what I would call macro-level geographic units. Now, my work suggests there's something else we ought to think about. Something else ought to be at the center of the crime or crime prevention equation. And that thing is place as I think about it. And Ron has a slide. Place in this case is not these larger macro areas of place. The communities of sometimes interested crime prevention practitioners and criminologists, certainly not people in this case. The center of the crime prevention equation becomes small geographic areas. This is from a study, the Minneapolis Hotspots experiment, that Larry Sherman and I developed. And in this study, we said that an important unit for the police to focus on is the area of a street from intersection to intersection, a street segment, as you could call it, or a street block. And in this area, lots of things go on. It makes it easy for the police to target. It's a natural place for them to look at. But lots of things happen socially, among people, etc., to make it a very important unit, much different by the units, by the way, of communities or large areas. Just one other example, we all know that sometimes crime doesn't restrict itself to a single block, and sometimes there are groups of blocks together that have a related crime problem that's focused there. This is from the displacement diffusion project that was actually conducted by the Police Foundation. And in this project, we looked at a prostitution site and a drug-involved crime site. And in this case, the hotspot wasn't just one street segment. It was a group of street segments, represented here by the orange, that had that sort of problem. So this idea, even here, is much, much, much smaller than the traditional large geographic units that have been at the center of the crime equation when people have talked about places. Now, we've noted already, most of the time people are talking about who done it in any event.
Well, you say that there are related microunits, is that correct? How do you know it's not just a bad neighborhood?
Well, let's start. Can we go back a little bit, which is the question of why we were talking about this before, because it'll make it easy to understand. The question is, why do we think that place, that type of place, is important?
Yeah,
right?
Why are they?
It's if you look at this is a study we did in Seattle. And what we did in this case, we took 30,000 street segments, those units like the Minneapolis Hotspots experiment, and we said, okay, let's look at these 30,000 street segments. How does crime distribute? If you look here, you can see that less than 5% of the places account for 50% of the crime in Seattle. So 5%, it's actually less than 5% of these street segments. They produce 50% or more of crime. Now, importantly as well, they do it each year, year after year, as you can see. It's quite stable, 14 years. Well, this suggests a law of concentration. This is not the only study to show it, but I should note this is the only longitudinal study to show it. Lots of studies now show that crime is not spread throughout an urban area. It's concentrated at these places. Let's call them hotspots of crime. Now, that, of course, suggests a kind of opportunity for crime prevention. If crime is not spread everywhere, if crime is concentrated in a relatively small number of places, then there's a tremendous opportunity, perhaps, for focusing the police or other crime prevention agents at those places. Huh. Now, this leads me to the question you asked about, if I can go back now, be easier for me, about how do I know those places aren't all in the same neighborhood? I guess that's the question, right? It's maybe that previous idea of community whatever is actually right. Maybe there's 1%, there's a small number of places that have lots and lots of crime, but maybe those places are all in one place in the city. Now, I think it's a good question. The data suggests it's not exactly right. It's not right. In another study we did in Seattle, we looked at juvenile crime hotspots, and I want to use this example because it's a small number of places to deal with. We looked at juvenile crime incidents. We said, where are they committed? We found that 86 street segments in the city produced a third of all juvenile crime incidents. Imagine, a police chief can focus in on a relatively small number of juvenile hotspots and pay attention to a relatively large amount of crime. I should note, Chief Lanier and I are talking about this and trying to take this sort of idea and see whether we can develop a program to do something about it. But that's the natural idea. We have an opportunity. If you look at this map that Ron just put up, these are those 86 hotspots, and I chose this example because there's not a lot of them. The first thing you think of this map is it's all over the city. In other words, this is Seattle. There are good neighborhoods, quote. There are bad neighborhoods, quote. These hotspots sort of exist all throughout this map. It reminds me, when I did the first study I did like this in Jersey City, New Jersey, we were mapping drug markets. And I sat down with the deputy chief. We were going over it, and he pointed to the map. He said, I didn't know there was a drug market 2 blocks from my house. Now, many times I'm sure the police do know, but sometimes they may not. It's spread throughout the city. Now, another element to this map is if you look in the downtown area, it looks like it's just a cluster right on top of each other. Part of that is the resolution of these, the visual that you're looking at. The truth is, when we look at an area like the downtown area, where there's more of those places that are problematic, certainly. There's a larger concentration, if you like, in that community than in some other communities. But even there, we found tremendous street-by-street variation. In a study that we did on crime more generally, we found that if it was a high crime hotspot on a street segment, it was more likely that the street segment next to you would not be the highest crime group than it was that they would be. So there's tremendous street-by-street variability. And that has just a final comment. I think when we talk about neighborhoods, we're sort of stigmatizing whole areas. You can go into neighborhoods you think are not very good, and lots of the streets are completely free of crime. Well, at least in the definition of crime, it's wrong to talk about that whole neighborhood as a bad neighborhood. You're not only missing the fact that you need to concentrate in certain areas within that neighborhood, you're also sort of, in my view at least, stigmatizing the whole neighborhood on the basis of specific places. Focus in on those places. Don't take the whole